Nessa cidade todo mundo é do chum. Homem, menino, menina, mulher. Toda essa gente irradia magia. Presente na água doce, presente na água salgada, em toda a cidade brilha. Seja tenente ou filho de pescador, ou importante desembargador. Se dá presente é tudo uma coisa só. A força que mora na água não faz distinção de cor, e toda a cidade é do chum. É do chum. During my time that I was conducting my fieldwork in Itacaré, I heard that song played several times. Lilts its way into the public imaginary with its lyrics that sing of how everyone is do chum. This phrase literally translates as belongs to Oxum or of Oxum. When a person is initiated into the Candomblé religion, an Orisha is assigned to the person, or rather, an Orisha chooses the person. In this case, if the Maiji Santo or Paiji Santo determined that the person was a son or a daughter of Oxum, the person would then refer to him or herself as being Doxum. Oxum is the Orisha associated with rivers and freshwaters. She is typically portrayed with a mirror in her hand and is considered vain. She's often characterized as a beautiful temptress. One story I heard was that she was so vain she did not want to keep her children, so she abandoned them and Yansa raised them. One woman I encountered during fieldwork offered me an interesting perspective on Oxum in particular and on the nature of Candomblé practices in general. Well, very few people were willing to engage in deep conversations about religion. One woman I met commented casually one day that she could no longer practice Candomblé. I asked her why she chose to switch religions. She said that once she heard that song singing about how everyone belongs to Oxum, or, as might be interpreted in the context that everyone is a son or daughter of Oxum, she had doubts. She thought to herself, if everybody is already of Oxum, why does she have to do all the work decorating her house with yellow flowers? She said it was too much esotericism for her. This resonates with a comment I heard from someone on my first trip to Bahia in 2008 when I was in Salvador studying Orisha dancing with Augusto Omolu. One of the people Augusto had arranged to serve as a kind of guide for us commented that he would never become involved with Candomblé. He said it was too much responsibility. For these two people, in two very different ways, they conceived of the religious practices as being alternately too much work, too much esotericism, or too much responsibility. For both of them, it was less about the choice to self-identify as one religion and more about how much work or responsibility it would require. Some women selected their identity based on their domestic role, mother or wife, or on their role within the community, business owner or retired nurse, for example. Some women select their role based on their history, Quilombo descendant, or on their place of birth, Nativa daqui or Paulista. The theme of identity emerged in the study as a result of looking at the ways some women began to talk about how they sometimes felt obligated to appear a certain way. Fatima, a bar owner living in the Roça, commented, "Tem que mostrar cara bonita." This literally translates as, you have to show your pretty face. But in the context of the conversation, it implies more of a felt obligation to always be smiling, particularly as a woman who works as the owner of a bar. In a casual conversation with one woman, she commented that she used to be called upon to play a slave in the school plays when it came time to study Brazilian colonial history. She ended up hating history and hated playing the slave. In another conversation, she complained how her bosses always treat her like a slave, indicating the long working hours and low wages. In another conversation, a resident of Porto de Trás lamented that just like in the time of slavery, there are still too many men who sexually abuse young women because they think they have a right to it. These comments seem to indicate an awareness of recurring reminders of the ways residual effects of slavery and colonization continue to evoke felt perceptions of these histories on the part of the women living there. In one observation I conducted at night in the center of town, I noticed one particular man who seemed to set himself apart from the rest of the crowd. The people I was with also noticed, and some commented on his impromptu performance. He began dancing samba on the street, just like many others who had gathered to watch the live band hired for the night. Through a combination of his energy and enthusiasm, in addition to what I can only interpret as a deliberate calling attention to himself, he ended up at the edge of the sidewalk in front of the bar. The crowd had given him some space in a gesture that seemed designed to offer him a solo or a highlighted attention. After several songs getting to this point, after he had kicked off his flip-flops to dance barefoot and removed his shirt to reveal a torso glistening with sweat, toward the end of one song, he began to shake and shimmy his torso in a move I have seen in candomblé terreiros that indicates a person is going into trance. The people I was with were in heated disagreement about whether or not he was truly in trance. One woman claimed he was ridiculous. Another woman insisted, no, he goes into trance. I've seen it many times. What I found most intriguing was how the tourists seemed to love it. Many of them whipped out their smartphones with video cameras and recorded the images of the sweaty black man dancing his exotic dances. He seemed to eat up the attention. I did see him quite often looking to namorar with wealthy-looking white foreign visitors. These dynamics illustrate a complex web of interactions between locals and tourists. While some locals use the term casa gringo or casa gringa freely, others find the term offensive. Additionally, there are plenty of natives of the region who work as tour guides. These men will show tourists around to the various businesses, restaurants, and bars which cater to tourists, oftentimes accompanying them to the bar and remaining with them to ensure they're having a good time, dance with them, and show them how to dance the local dance, forró pé de serra. As Williams indicated in her work on these kinds of ambiguous entanglements, the line is not always clear, and in order to fully understand the dynamics at play, we must let judgment be set aside. As part of my own process of critical self-reflection, I had to acknowledge that I was deeply implicated in the ways I interacted with the locals and the degree to which I resisted the role of tourist, particularly the kind of tourist who pays for the services of local guides, because I preferred to see myself as someone who already knew a little bit about the local setting and therefore did not need a guide. What I later realized is that the relationships I had forged were already woven into these dynamics. This has several implications, and most importantly, that I needed to understand how my presence affects the daily realities of the natives of the region. I may have desired to be viewed as someone already familiar with the local environment, but local residents rely on the ability to make a living off of tourists. One of the ways that has been most lucrative for them is to be independent tour guides. For me to reap the benefits of having a local friend take me around the area, the reality of that dynamic is that some might view that situation as me exploiting a local person in order to gain free access to spaces for which someone else might have needed to pay. When I asked a group of women from the neighborhood of Porto de Trás how tourism might be handled differently in a way that might better serve the community, they described a madrinho-padrinho system that used to work well. In that system, when one of the local tour guides from the neighborhood would bring tourists to come to the Centro Cultural for classes in capoeira or dance, the participants paid their class fee, but they also informally adopted a child from the neighborhood. The requirement was that you would bring treats and presents to the children in the community if they were going to enjoy the use of the community center. Nonna, who is part of the committee that runs the community center, and her 2 daughters and niece indicated they wish it would return to that system. In those days, children played safely in the streets and added vibrancy to the community. They are quite sure why that system stopped working, but expressed a desire to have that in place again. These kinds of critical reflections about my place in this tourist-centered space also led me to question the ways one's value is negotiated in this setting. In one conversation that revolved around the negotiation of value and self-worth, a U.S.-American tourist asked me, "Why are Black people oppressed here? Aren't they the majority?" In the moment that question was posed to me, I felt blindsided by something that seemed so obvious. I later scolded myself for not bringing up South African apartheid as the most obvious situation where the white minority oppressed the Black majority for generations. In casual conversation with a fellow traveler, I also felt awkward trying to find a way to enter this complicated dialogue in a way that didn't feel overly didactic. Wasn't this person on vacation? Who am I to call someone out on their unacknowledged privilege in that setting? These negotiations and exchanges continued to be a motivating factor for this work and the ways I hope to unpack unacknowledged tourist privilege. The very notion of being able to take time off from work is an idea that stems from a certain level of privilege. The year my partner came with me to Itacaré, he pointed this out to me. What I thought I saw was people hanging out. What he saw was people living in an economically depressed area. Hanging out became less an activity of leisure and became a reflection of a lack of opportunity. On the surface, they might appear similar. People waiting in an unemployment line are not hanging out. People with the privilege to have leisure time, people on vacation, are the ones who get to hang out. The term vacation is often used to imply that nothing serious can be approached. It can be used as an excuse to remain ignorant. As part of the process of engaging in critical self-reflection, I began to ask different questions of the encounters I was observing. I then asked myself why I associated wandering and hanging out with the concept I have so often called paradise. What enables wandering and hanging out? Are those pleasurable activities? Is one required a certain level of freedom in order to engage in them? Or are these activities resulting from a lack of opportunity? Are these not also activities in which someone who is unemployed might partake? How different does it feel to wander because one has no other option versus having the financial privilege to wander and hang out and still know my bills are being paid at the end of the month? This became an especially tricky question to pose when many of the people in Itacaré work as temporary seasonal workers or as tour guides or in the informal sector. Some work as artisans selling their wares in the praça. Some work as tour guides. Some work as vendedores ambulantes, or as many people call them, mochileiros. The phrase literally translates as backpackers, but in this setting it becomes the word that the vendors of the cabanas on the beach use almost in a pejorative sense. Many vendors from the cabanas resent the mochileiros and chase them off when they approach their customers. I heard stories from some vendors that certain cabana owners and managers are actually quite rude about it. The dynamics of these tensions between those who run the fixed structures and those who sell their wares as vendedores ambulantes becomes even more complex when other criteria are examined. Recently, in Salvador and other parts of Bahia, a law regarding guidelines for building permanent structures on the coastline was enforced. The way local vendors explained this to me is that according to Brazilian federal law, no permanent structure can be built within a certain distance of the coast. This law has apparently rarely been enforced. Some cabana owners and managers have urged the mayor of Itacaré to fight this enforcement on legal grounds. But the irony here is that many of the people who own or manage these cabanas are doing so illegally. One woman who runs one of the more successful and well-known cabanas indicated that not one single cabana on the beach was constructed with official approval from the prefeitura. To complicate the dynamics even more, some vendedores ambulantes are officially sanctioned and part of a local association of vendors who work as a kind of union to help protect the rights of vendors and to provide helpful infrastructure. Others are not affiliated in any way with any association and simply arrive on the beach, sell their goods, and do not report official earnings or pay vendor licenses. I've heard some local residents indicate that they love how much freedom they have to live in a beautiful setting, work minimal hours, and live a relatively carefree lifestyle. Some have even made comments such as, "You won't starve here, there's plenty of fruit on the trees to pick and there are plenty of fish to catch, and beans, rice, and flour are cheap." But this romanticized vision of life as a temporary, unofficial, seasonal worker does not tell the whole story. Several people have indicated to me that social inequality has only gotten worse as a result of increased tourism, and that there are very real difficulties that for many women seem impossible to overcome. The most common complaints about life in Itacaré are the quality of education and the quality of healthcare. Many complain about corruption but feel powerless to do anything about it. This indicates that the binary of tourist and local is insufficient to explain how local residents who are the wealthy landowners and/or politicians enter this complicated negotiation of social status. When I reflect on that story of the sweaty, shirtless black man shimmying on the street for the spectatorial pleasure of tourists, I also have to look at the ways the young capoeiristas do the same thing, posing for photos with the tourists after their demonstration at one of the local bars, sweaty, shirtless, and smiling. And I must also reflect on how the elders from the Quilombo communities confirm what the body of literature on the history of capoeira has debated, that these public displays of capoeira violate the very spirit of what some consider capoeira to be, a practice of resistance, a personal practice of spiritual and physical conditioning, and a way to engage in these practices as an exercise in understanding life lessons. But these reflections must also be considered with other comments I heard indicating that the continued marginalization of Quilombo culture has resulted in real and tangible material effects. An official statement issued by the Quilombo Council of Itacaré indicates that increased tourism has not brought increased prosperity to their community, but rather has brought increased underemployment, unemployment, and further social marginalization. So, while some members of the community indicate a desire for increased exposure of their own cultural practices, be they artisan, crafts, or performance practices, others express a nostalgic desire for a return to times when the community enjoyed the samba de roda or an impromptu roda de capoeira without being tourist spectators. This relationship between spectator, tourist, and native on display reflects the ways tourism has been promoted in Bahia by the official state tourism board. Those who make their living off of interactions with tourists have expressed a need to show their cara bonita, even when feeling irritated or otherwise unhappy. This cara bonita is reiterated over and over in tourist propaganda, showing the radiant, smiling, brown-skinned locals ready, willing, and able to serve the foreign tourists or invite them into their rodas de capoeira. This implicit expectation often goes unnoticed and unquestioned on the part of the tourists. I myself look back at the things I had written about the place from my first encounter. I used phrases like, "People are so warm and nice and open here," without pausing to ask myself why that might be. I asked many of my study participants for their views on tourism. Mireia, a trans woman and self-identified Quilombo descendant, offered her response. Que eles sejam mais compreensivos, sejam mais abertas a novidades, que sejam menos preconceituosos, menos racistas, e que eles venham para Itacaré para viver Itacaré, não só para usar as praias e deixar sujas, que eles vejam e revejam o conceito de turismo, onde realmente está o turismo, onde eles têm que ir de verdade, onde está a comunidade que nos acolhe. Tratar melhor a cidadão, que seja ele negro, branco, que seja. Não há respeito. Eles não têm respeito para as pessoas. Que venham ali e acham que um qualquer, não é um qualquer. Tem uma dignidade vir para cá. Puxa, não é só chegar aqui e querer um bom só porque gastou milhões. Não é isso que a gente quer. Perhaps the willingness to see what is wrong requires a willingness to feel the discomfort that comes with this awareness. It is much more comfortable to remain blissfully ignorant of problems in our communities. For those who demand we see the problem and continue fighting to do something about it, the discomfort requires action. The discomfort seems to be inextricably linked to the perception and awareness of the problem. I argue this discomfort, this uncertainty, this affective response to the situation is essential for the process of refraction to occur. Thanks for listening. See you next time.